In Ohio, Curtis gazes at the massive clouds in the sky while standing in the rain, confused. Instead of water, it seems to be motor oil falling from the sky. But it's only a dream, and the weather is actually calm. After waking, Curtis has breakfast with his wife, Samantha, and their deaf daughter, Hannah. Curtis works for a construction company, while Samantha stays at home, caring for Hannah and sewing items to sell at the local fair on Saturdays. That afternoon, Samantha is hosting a playdate at home with some friends and their children. One of them notices that Hannah has grabbed a dangerous piece of wood with nails, so Samantha rushes outside to stop her, as shouting warnings doesn't help. Just then, the rain becomes heavy, forcing the construction crew to stop for the day. Afterward, the workers go to a bar to unwind. At home, Samantha teaches Hannah the sign for a storm while watching the rain through the window. After leaving the bar, Curtis drops off his friend and co-worker Duarte at his house. They talk briefly, with Duarte mentioning how great Curtis' life seems. Curtis admits things aren't always as perfect as they appear. Their conversation is interrupted when Duarte's wife silently urges him to come inside. Later that evening, Curtis checks on Hannah and learns from Samantha that Hannah still struggles to connect with other children. The next day, Curtis cleans up the yard to prevent Hannah from grabbing dangerous items. Suddenly, a heavy storm rolls in and lightning strikes nearby, causing Curtis' dog, Red, to start barking uncontrollably. As Curtis grabs Hannah's hand to comfort her, Red breaks free from his chain and viciously attacks Curtis, biting his arm. But just as the attack happens, Curtis wakes up in his room, realizing it was another nightmare. At breakfast, Curtis is shaken by the vividness of the dream. He becomes anxious when he sees Hannah playing with Red and quickly takes her away from the dog. Samantha asks if something is wrong, but Curtis snaps at her and leaves without touching his food. Later at work, Curtis is distracted, still fixating on his arm as he stares at it during a meeting. His boss, Jim, expresses frustration over the rain delays and pushes the crew to catch up. On his way to the construction site, Curtis asks Duarte to help him grab extra supplies. Afterward, while taking a break, Curtis sees a strange swarm of black birds flying in unusual patterns in the sky. He asks Duarte if he notices anything, but Duarte sees nothing unusual. Due to the overtime, Curtis arrives late to the parent-teacher conference at Hannah's school, covered in mud and apologizing for missing church. During the meeting, they discuss important signs for communication, which Curtis feels he needs to practice more, as he doesn't spend as much time with Hannah as Samantha does. Later that evening, it rains again, and Curtis rushes to get in the car with Hannah. The rain makes it difficult to see, and they crash. Although Curtis is injured with a bleeding head, Hannah is unharmed. But before he can fully process what happened, Curtis wakes up, realizing once more that it was just another nightmare. Curtis feels ill as he heads downstairs for the day. Samantha, concerned, tries to ask him about it, but Curtis insists it's just a cold and tells her to take Hannah to the fair. While Samantha sells her goods at the fair, Curtis works on building a fence around Red's doghouse, locking him in to prevent any further incidents. He then finds a storm shelter door and decides to explore it, retrieving the key from an old jar. That evening, while Samantha talks about the money she made at the fair, Curtis continues to worry. After hearing news about a gas leak affecting a nearby family, his paranoia grows. The next day, Curtis finds Hannah watching the storm outside and notices a man standing by their window. Panicked, he grabs Hannah and hides, just as the building begins to shake, with objects levitating in the living room. Curtis struggles to breathe, and everything suddenly crashes back down. But once again, it's another nightmare. To his shock, Curtis wakes up to find that he wet the bed. Samantha walks in and notices something is off, but Curtis covers up the situation. He asks for a doctor's number, and although Samantha is concerned, he insists it's nothing serious. He tells her to go to church, as he can manage with Hannah. After they leave, Curtis changes the sheets and washes off the evidence of his accident. Later, Curtis takes Hannah to the library and distracts her with a book while he searches for information on mental health issues. They stop at a grocery store on the way home to buy canned food. which causes them to be late for a family lunch. At home, Curtis continues preparing the storm shelter, storing all the canned food he bought. That afternoon, he finally sees a doctor, who agrees that his sleep troubles are concerning but thinks it's not a major issue. He prescribes him some medication and suggests he see a psychiatrist. Meanwhile, Samantha visits the insurance agency and learns that all the costs for Hannah's hearing restoration surgery will be covered. Later that day, Curtis receives his medicine from the pharmacy, and he's surprised by how little he has to pay, thanks to their insurance plan. The family enjoys a nice dinner that evening to celebrate the good news. Curtis doesn't mention the medication to them, secretly taking it in the bathroom. The next morning, Curtis feels rested, and Samantha notices his improvement. But at work, he is still distracted, unable to shake the anxiety. As he talks to Duarte, he suddenly hears thunder in the clear sky, which only he seems to hear. Curtis panics, rushing to a bin to vomit. He takes a moment to regain control, but is still struggling to breathe. Eventually, he buys a container to expand the shelter, and later visits his mother, who is heavily medicated and unresponsive due to paranoid schizophrenia. Curtis is worried that he might be experiencing the same symptoms. Back home, Curtis secretly takes out a loan to fund the conversion of the shelter into a full bunker, disregarding his agent's warnings. After work, he gets Duarte's help to bring equipment from the construction site, and they begin building the shelter. Duarte asks Curtis if he's okay, but Curtis assures him that he is. Curtis later visits a counselor to discuss his situation, opening up about his troubled childhood and his mother's mental illness. While at a school meeting, Curtis becomes increasingly paranoid about lightning in the sky, though no one else seems concerned. On a Saturday, while Samantha and Hannah are at the fair, Curtis and Duarte work on the shelter. When Samantha returns, she's shocked by what she sees and confronts Curtis about the loan and his strange decisions, including locking up Red. Curtis dismisses her concerns, causing a heated argument. He leaves to check on Hannah, while Samantha breaks down. That night, Curtis takes more medication than prescribed, and in the early hours, he suffers a seizure. Samantha calls an ambulance despite his protests, and after the paramedics leave, Curtis admits everything to Samantha. He assures her he's been seeing a counselor because he doesn't want to end up like his mother. The next day, Curtis and Samantha take Hannah to the hospital for a checkup, and the surgery is scheduled for 6 weeks. At work, Curtis requests Duarte be reassigned, not wanting to give orders to his best friend. His boss, Jim, agrees but warns Curtis about his attendance. Curtis buys gas masks at a store, though they're expensive. Meanwhile, Duarte's wife talks to Samantha about Curtis' behavior, but Samantha defends him. Later, Curtis' brother, Kyle, visits, expressing concern for Curtis' health. Curtis denies anything is wrong, and they have an awkward conversation. Curtis asks Kyle to take Red, and Kyle leaves soon after. One stormy afternoon, Curtis has a vivid dream where Samantha, soaked from the rain, considers grabbing a knife. He wakes up feeling disturbed, and at breakfast, Curtis withdraws when Samantha tries to touch his hand. Soon after, they see Jim waiting outside. Curtis rushes to meet him and is fired for taking equipment from the construction site. With only 2 weeks of medical insurance left, Duarte is also given 2 weeks of unpaid leave. Curtis shares the news with Samantha, who reacts angrily before rushing out with Hannah. Curtis later visits his counselor, but discovers she has been transferred. The new counselor wants him to start over, but Curtis leaves without speaking. He returns to work on the shelter, ignoring his wife's concerns about money. Samantha begins sewing clothes for neighbors to make extra money, but it's not enough. She takes money from their vacation savings to cover bills. Samantha confronts Curtis about his outbursts and tells him she is canceling their beach trip, but they'll use his last paycheck to cover bills. She insists that Curtis must see a psychiatrist, and she wants him to come to a school dinner to help with his isolation. At the dinner, Duarte confronts Curtis, blaming him for his suspension. Curtis tries to talk privately, but Duarte lashes out. The argument escalates, and Curtis has a breakdown, yelling about an impending storm. Samantha takes him home, where he has a breakdown. Later, Curtis sees Hannah in the road during a storm and runs to grab her. Just as they are surrounded by black birds flying in strange patterns, the birds fall dead from the sky. Curtis hurries them inside, and a siren begins to wail. Curtis wakes up, realizing the siren is real. He rushes his family to the shelter, and they wait through the storm, wearing oxygen masks. Hours later, Curtis wakes up to find the storm has passed. Samantha insists that he open the door, but Curtis refuses, convinced the storm is still outside. Samantha challenges him to face his fears and open the door. Curtis finally does, revealing a sunny day and calm neighbors cleaning up debris. The next day, Curtis visits a psychiatrist who prescribes more medication and suggests he take time off from the shelter. The family is advised to take a few days to rest, and Curtis will be sent to a specialized facility for recovery. At the beach, while Curtis and Hannah are building a sandcastle, Hannah signs the word storm as she looks at the sea. Samantha notices it's raining oil, and the family sees a huge storm on the horizon. Curtis looks at Samantha, who nods in silent agreement that she can see it too.